Welcome back. So right now the iLocation validator right now is just a blank interface. Of course we need something in there, and what we need is kind of this method right here, the default validation that we built earlier. We want that inside that interface, right? Now let's do it test driven again. So we'll go down to the iLocation validator down here, and instead of using, let's just start from the beginning, instead of using the location validator now, we're going to actually start using this iLocation validator that we just built. Let's just import that guy, and then of course you'll notice that it doesn't know about the default validation right now that we built, the method, because that's not available in the interface. So let's just move that into the interface so we have it available as a quick thing right here. Go to the iLocation validator and just add that simple method right here and import the location. There we go. Now we have the iLocation validator with the default validation, which is the basic part of validation I needed for my location validator. And let's just go back to the test now. Now it seems to be running, and of course I'll do the same for the rest of the test down here, so they're starting to use the interface instead of the actual implementation. And again, if you don't already kind of figure that one out from the last lesson, it makes sense to use these interfaces because I can easily now switch the validator into another validator if I want to later on. So now we have these available, and we have iLocation validation up and running, and everything is good. Now let's start talking about the flow, because I want to build this flow now, and I want test-driven development to kind of form this new flow that I want to build, which is when I call the create function with a location, I want that create function to inside it in the service call the default validation on the iLocation validator. So let's try and do that test driven, this lesson right here. So jump back to the code. The first step is I want to go into the location service test right here, and I actually prepared a small method right here called create with location parameter should call the iLocation validator's default validation method one time. I know that's a long title for a method, but it's just again to give you the idea. And again, if you read the method, you'll see the flow. When I call from the iLocation service, the create function with the location, it should call default validation on the iLocation validator with that location, right? That's kind of what this message says right here. Let's try and do it. So first of all, I need an iLocation service. Let's just steal it right here. Yoink, da 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 da, boink. There we go. And I also need a iLocation validator, but it's not actually going to be an iLocation validator, it's going to be a mock. So let's just create a mock right here of the type iLocation validator. There we go, equals, and then we'll make a new mock of that type. Now notice, I'm not doing .object like I'm doing right here to kind of get an implementation. I'm just using the mock right here for now. So now with that in place, let's actually create the location service right here, location service. There we go, location service equals new location service, and there I'll pass in the location repository, and then the second thing I'll pass in is actually the mock objects dot object, right? So notice here I call object, but now I have the mock available, and I need that mock later, so it's very important I use that mock. So now with the location service in place, I also need a location, and that location actually needs to be a valid location, right? So it's not enough just to make a new location right here. It needs to have a name, and whatever else I'm validating, it needs to have those things, or else I'll get an exception like I expect, because my validator will throw that exception, okay? So here I'll just pass in for now. I'll create a location right here, and for now I only need the name for that location, and let's just call it the village. That's where my chicken resides right now. And then the final thing I need to do is kind of use the location service. I'll call the create method like we've done before. I'll pass in the location, and now that'll actually create a new location in the service. And all I want to test with this entire system right here is the flow that when I do call that, this location validation mock must be called once. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to verify that the location mock is going to be called with the default validation method with that location that I just created, right? So what I'm doing right here is pretty much just I'm saying that when I call the create right here, I expect that this guy has been called, or in this case, the actual location validator has been called one time with the default validation. It's passed the location, and then I expect it to be called how many times? Actually, one time. So I can say times once. That means it should only be called one time, not 2, 3, 4, 7 times, only one single time. So again, let's try and run this, and let me just explain the flow while I just trigger this run right here. So what I'm testing is that when you call that create function on the location service, I'm testing that this guy is called one time, not more than one time, not for instance 2 times, right? It could have been called twice, but I expect it to only be called one single time. That's kind of my goal. Of course the test fails right now. Why? Because it's not called at all. But look at this. I expect that the invocation of the mux default validation should be called one time, but it's actually called 0 times. That's what it's saying right here. So let's have a look at how we can fix this. And of course, the fix is pretty easy. Let's go to the location service right here. And let's have a look at what we should do. First of all, we need kind of a reference for the location validator. I don't think we need to unit test that. It's just a reference. So we'll get that in here, location validator. And I'll just make a local reference for it with a field right here. Now we have it available. And step 2, now I need to call that location validator dot get default validation right here with the location. Let's try and rerun our unit test. There we go. Now I have kind of separated the logic. One unit test takes care of figuring out if we're actually calling that validation, and the other unit test that we've made is just testing that we are actually validating everything as we expect us to do. And as you saw, the unit tests are now passing. And this one is kind of an interesting one because this one actually figures out if we are following the right flow, where these ones are actually figuring out if we're using the right business logic. So let's end it there. I know that was a pretty long video. Next video, we'll just talk a little bit more about this mocking and this way that we validate it. But for now, let's just end it because there's a lot here to comprehend. There's a lot of new stuff. Go and check it out again if you need it. I can actually get rid of all of this code right now because that's not the responsibility anymore of our create function inside the service. All it needs to do is call the validator. And what we just tested was that that validator is actually called inside our code using the mux and using the current setup that we have right here. We know that it's only called one time right now. That's it for this lesson. See you next time. Have fun.